Hey guys, how y'all doing? My name is Harmonic Chaos. I hope you're absolutely all having a blessed day today. So the one thing that is kind of well known about me is that I am what is called an audio engineer.
Wow.
Today, Junior! It can be as fancy as it sounds, but it's not. So what does that mean? Basically, that just means that I'm somebody that works with sound. And yeah, that's pretty much what that means. Someone who works with audio or works with sound in some capacity is an audio engineer.
Wow.
Obviously, there are different types of audio engineers. There are two types. That's actually a lie. There's a bunch of subsections underneath these two main ones, but boring. So the two sort of main ones that I'm going to be talking about today are producer and the live audio. So like I said, underneath these headings, there's obviously subtypes of audio engineers. So underneath the producer side of things, there is the mixing engineer, and then there is the mastering engineer. And the mixing engineer, again, could probably be multiple subheadings underneath this one too, but with the mixing engineer, what they do is they're the ones that really put together tracks, that are, sitting there in the studio listening and like piecing together and working on things to make kind of like craft what a song is going to sound like in the end. They're the ones that if they need to like find, certain 808 hit that they want to put in there, or a certain snare sound that they want to do, they'll put it in there and they'll tweak it. So kind of like a mixing engineer. If you've ever seen Cranked at his content on social media where he'll like take a sound and then do a whole bunch of stuff to it, make it sound completely different, and then like tweak that into a whole full-on song.
Doesn't matter. Here we go.
About to go to Taco Bell and get me a bottle. Taco Bell and get me a bottle.
That is essentially like an extreme example of what a mixing engineer does. I'll talk about this more later, but there's also like the studio element that falls underneath the mixed category, but that's basically someone who is like sitting there, running faders as someone or a group of people is in a recording studio, playing music, singing, all that sort of stuff. That's a very 30,000 foot view of the mix side of things. And then there is the master portion of the producer. Now, what a master engineer does, not a like high level master engineer, like I guess a mastering engineer, that's actually the proper term for it. I don't know why I said the other thing, but what they do is they are the ones that are fine tuning everything that the mix engineer did. So, and a lot of times it's actually not the same person that mixes will master, simply because when a master engineer gets a track, is really key to have like a clean slate, hearing it for the first time so you can like really fine tune the elements to it. A lot of times what that looks like is there's what's known as a mastering chain, which is like a bunch of different stacked effects that run in a certain order that they will just apply to whatever track they're working on. It automatically, usually in the program that they use, it'll just automatically apply it. I think you can set it to a macro probably, or you can have it saved as a preset. I think you can do either or. I remember correctly. I don't interact a lot with the mastering side of things. So either way, they have the mastering chain, and there's a lot of different common elements that exist inside of a mastering chain. One that it can be included, but normally isn't because you really need to pay close attention to fine tuning is EQ, but that's a whole other thing that I'll talk about here in a second. Very commonly, it's a compressor. Sometimes there's a saturator. It really does. That depends on song by song basis. A de-esser, a ditherer, and a limiter, which a limiter and a compressor are not quite the same thing. They can, if used similarly, can result in sort of a similar thing, but they are different in most uses. So they'll run that, and then what that does is essentially makes a song radio ready. What being radio ready is essentially means that you want to have your song be as loud as possible according to a Lufs scale without hitting above a certain level of true peak. And that sounded like a whole lot of technical nonsense.
Wow, that's a lot of words.
And I mean, for the most part it is, but basically what the Lufs scale is loudness units relative to full scale, which again sounds like a whole lot of nonsense, but basically it is the combined overall loudness of a song. Yeah, that's pretty much what that means. It basically is the maximum level that a system can handle. And usually the target for the Lufs scale is you want to have it bounce anywhere between -16 and -10. A lot of times, like another utilization thing that LUFS is used for is that streaming platforms will have a limiter where if you go above a certain LUFS scale, it'll crush your song back down and add a whole lot of compression, and that can really distort the way that it sounds, and you lose a ton of dynamics. Like, I believe Spotify is -14, I think. So if you have a song that's like at -10 LUFS, it'll crush it down by 4 LUF units, and you will lose so much quality in your quality and dynamics, but very noticeable. And then what I said about true peak is that the true peak is like how actually loud on a dB scale your song is, and you normally, for that, you don't want to go above a -1, because if you hit 0 or you go above 0, then you will run into distortion because your audio will be peaking and it just won't be good. So basically, radio ready is how loud your song can be without being like distorted when you send it, essentially. One thing that you have heard me throw around a ton is the term EQ. Let me explain. So EQ stands for equalization, and essentially, now the human range of hearing goes from 20 hertz to 20,000, and that is the range that you have to work with when you are creating a song. And anything underneath 20 you can feel, because that's like deep, like you can't necessarily hear it, but you can feel it. And anything above 20 gets into like a dog whistle range where like a animal can hear it, but the human ear can't. So with an EQ, what this means as far as like an audio perspective is that each instrument and each vocalist has a very unique range where the sound is produced. So with a kick drum, it produces between 20 and 100 is usually where the primary overtone is going to be for a kick drum, and a bass exists in that same genre, in that same area, but it's usually a little bit lower, but again, different depending on what they're playing. The bass changes around, but the kick drum will always produce the primary overtone in the same area. And then overtones, that's a whole other thing that I'm not getting into today. I've just, that maybe later. Maybe when you're older. But basically what you can do with this is in a EQ, so the whole range, there's what's called a dynamic EQ, which that's a tool in, you know, a soundboard, but also in a DAW, where you look at the entire frequency spectrum, and then you can pull out certain frequencies, or you can like cut swatches of frequencies out. So basically, if I'm talking, this also can explain what a de-esser is, but basically if I'm talking and you hear a real harsh noise every time I say an S, or if I enunciate S's really sharply, that's going to drive me insane while I'm editing it. But you know what? Deal with it. So I can take an entire EQ and look at it and be like, all right, so the S zone for a human voice is usually in the 10,000 range, somewhere between 10 and 15, or sometimes can be like 8 and 12. It really depends person to person. So I can take a little notch filter or a bell filter, depending on what I'm using, and I can basically go to that area. And there's normally about 4. There's the low, medium high, and high, essentially. And I go and I'll take the high one, and I will go to that area, and I can either go in the positive or the negative, depending. I can go the positive to like hear louder in that one area of what the person is saying, and then find the exact point where the frequency is the loudest, and then make it a very narrow slice, very, very surgical, and just pull it all the way down and just completely eliminate that frequency from being able to be heard through the person's mic. So essentially getting rid of the sharp S, or, you know, what have you. And you can do that for a lot of things. Like the EQ is such a functional tool to be able to, I mean, you can take a bare bones snare drum, which doesn't sound great most of the time when someone hits it, and then you take that and then you carve it up and you only preserve the sounds that you want to, and then that's where you get like the really crisp, really great sounding snare drum, or, you know, all of that sort of stuff. So arguably the EQ is probably the main tool that an audio engineer uses, just kind of the way that it is. Because with EQ, like a lot of times you want to fix stuff with the EQ scale, and then you start adding in other effects, because if you don't fix a problem in the EQ, then it will compound when you add effects to it, and then it'll, like, at the end result, it'll not sound great. It really won't. Oh, there's so many technical things. You know, I wrote this script and I'm like, oh yeah, I could probably keep this pretty 30,000 foot, and then just the more that I'm sitting here and like talking, I'm like, oh man, there is so much more that I could have said. So that is the producer side of things. Then there's the live audio side of things. Now, if I'm being completely honest with you, live music and live audio is my bread and butter. It is what I have been doing since I was 17. So at this point, almost 10 years. Actually, yeah, as of my birthday this year, it'll be 10 years of me doing live audio, which is crazy to think about. It's actually crazy to think about. So what a live audio engineer does is they're the person that is in the sound booth when the band is up on stage playing. They're the ones that are controlling how loud everything is. They're the ones that are controlling, you know, if you hear more guitar, if you hear more vocals, if you hear more drums, like that's what they do. Now, a lot of times what a live audio engineer does is they set all of these levels in rehearsal, and then they have programmed scene. I mean, sometimes you'll do this. Like if you have a lot of changing between songs, you'll program a scene inside of your show, which that scene is basically, all right, this is the song, this is how many people are singing, this is, you know, the level of all the instruments that I want to have it, and then you save that, and then when you get to that song, you fire the next scene, and then it'll like load all those presets, and everything will be set the way that it needs to be set for that song. Now, that is some people's preferred method of doing it, not always. And I mean, there is like, I don't have enough time in this video, or probably 4 videos, to like fully break down everything that goes into this, because there is so much that you need to consider when you are talking about running sound, because like you'll have nodes and anodes in certain parts of the room. There'll be a frequency that's sharp, and other places that frequency won't be a problem at all, and then you kind of have to find a middle ground, and then if you do that, then it might get lost over here, and it's honestly, it's a whole process. Other times you'll have like hotspots for just volume in general, and the rest of the room won't have a problem, but one specific area will have a problem, and it is in fact a whole thing. Honestly, probably one of the reasons why I actually enjoy running live audio is because every time that I do it, it's just a puzzle that I have to figure out on the fly. It's a very high pressure puzzle. It's a very high pressure puzzle. But yes, so now technically underneath the live audio section of things, there are 2 different, you know, subheadings, technically 3, but we'll be focusing on 2 of them. We'll say the third one in a second. But the first one is the front of house, which is basically what I was just describing. You are mixing what everybody else in the room is hearing. And yeah, I mean, there's so much that goes into that to consider. And like I said, it is a whole thing, and if you are interested, I can make an entire separate video talking about being a front of house engineer, because bruh. But the other type of live audio engineer is the IEM mixer. IEM stands for in-ear monitor. Basically, whatever the musicians are hearing, I am mixing for them. Just, you know, just to ensure that they are getting the most accurate picture of everything that's happening on the stage, but also too making sure that they are still able to perform as best as they can. So basically making sure that they can hear themselves, and if they're playing an instrument, they can hear themselves in their instrument above everything else. And then like all of this is like personal preference. The IEM mix is completely subjective. Everybody's going to want to have a different mix, and it just kind of is the way it is. A lot of times too, musicians will have like an Aviom or an ME right next to them, and they can just like tweak their own settings, tweak their own volume, so it like doesn't have to go through the engineer. But that really is just a venue by venue situation. And then the third one that I briefly mentioned earlier was the studio engineer, the one that's there during the recording sessions. And they're kind of a mixture between the two, because they have a lot to consider as far as the producing side, but they also have a lot to consider as far as the mixing side, like live audio, because they're like sitting there like mixing it as it's getting recorded. But again, I think those actually get recorded out to like a track by track basis. So it's a whole thing. Admittedly, I know probably the second least about studio engineer, and then the third least is like the commercial audio engineer, if that really makes any sense. The ones that like go and install and have all of that back end knowledge of audio equipment. So yeah, like I said, the section of being an audio engineer that I know the most about is in fact the live audio side of things. But within the past 2 years, I've been learning a lot more about the producing side of things, and it's a lot of fun working on songs and like listening on repeat to a certain song and just tweaking it and 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 making it work. So yeah, and like the reason why I chose to be a live audio essentially specialist, not really, is because that was just what was available to me when I started learning. So the church that I was going to at the time, I walked up to the audio engineer that was running the soundboard there, that was like on staff at the church, and I'm like, hey, I'd love to learn how to do this. And yeah, like I have an ear for music. I played piano for like 6 years. I don't anymore, regrettably, but you know, I have this music background. Also, music seems to run in my family. Like literally all of my dad's brothers and sisters have an ear for music and can either sing or play an instrument. My dad's the same way, and most of my cousins can too. So yeah, you know, I have an ear. I'd love to learn how to do this. And then he showed me how to do everything. And ever since then, I've been running sound. So like literally when I was 17 until now. So that's what was available to me until I had some adult money to be able to buy Pro Tools to learn how to run Pro Tools and how to make like mix and master and all that sort of stuff. So that's why I focused on what I did. But you know, now come to find out, Pro Tools actually has a free version that you can download and use, and a lot of things will have like free trials and stuff like that. So what are like overall the tools of a producer? A producer's bread and butter. I say there because it's not usual. They have what's called a DAW, a DAW, or a digital audio workspace. You know, this is Logic Pro. That's the main one on Mac, and the main one for Windows is Fruity Loops or Fruit Loops Studios. I think it's Fruity Loops. Those are the two main ones. Fruity Loops is primarily on Windows, and Logic is only available on Mac. And then obviously there is Pro Tools, like I said. I run a Windows setup, and then also too, there's actually technically a free DAW available on Mac and on all Apple products. Is GarageBand. It's a very, very, very bare bones and very like limited and beginner DAW, but you can use it as that. And then what the digital audio workspace is, that's where you can drag in tracks, you can, you know, add effects, you can EQ stuff, all of the, like, that's literally like where songs are created are in these workspaces. But yeah, so with all of that being said, what is needed really to be an audio engineer? Well, I mean, realistically, it's an ear for music. Like, if you're listening to something, can you tell if it sounds bad, or does everything sound good to you? Or, you know, it's really hard to describe what an ear for music is, but basically it's, you know, just being able to listen to something and be like, oh, you know, I kind of wish that like this thing was louder, or that was louder, or this was different, or that was different. And that's kind of the basis for everything. Which again is like super vague, I know, but even if you don't necessarily have a super refined ear for music, just starting to learn all the steps to being an audio, like to either being a producer or a live audio engineer, just beginning to learn all those things, you can develop the ear for music. And then with a producer, the main thing that you need is like that creative sense, like where you can just envision what a song can sound like, and then you make it happen. Or you hear a sound and you're like, oh, I can use this, and then build an entire song around it. And then for a front of house side of things, really, like I said, it's a problem solving thing. You listen and you identify a problem very quickly, and then you're like, all right, cool, I need to fix this, or I need to pull that out, or this or that, or this or that. So it's a lot more like puzzle solving, essentially. But instead of like an image that you're trying to put together, it's a sound image you're trying to put together, if that makes any sense. Again, super vague, I'm aware of that, but it kind of just is what it is. But yeah, so if there's anything that you would like for me to make like a follow-up video on, or go deeper into detail, feel free to drop it in the comment section down below. And because I mean, there's like I said, this is very 30,000 foot view. There's a lot of stuff I didn't go into. And yeah, so with all that being said, again, my name has been Harmonic Chaos, and I hope you have absolutely all enjoyed, and I hope that you learned something, and I hope that you start giving it a try. You know, it's really, if you find the right person, it's really not that hard to get into it. Like for me, I was like I said, I went to the audio engineer at my church, and I'm like, hey, I want to learn how to do this, and he taught me. But I mean, if you want to learn, you know, a DAW, there's 1,000 different videos on YouTube showing you how to do what and when with a DAW. So literally the bar of entry is very, very low as long as you have a machine that can run it. That's also an aside. But yeah, if there's another video that you'd like to see from me, drop it in the comments down below, and I will be sure to get to it. And yeah, with all of that being said, I'll catch y'all next time. God bless.